When you're the best, you do things with style.
Chuck Norris, the man, the myth, the legend. A legend among legends. In this video, we'll discuss how the martial arts master just dominated the 1980s. I mean, he just took over that decade. It belonged to him.
Oh, what are you talking about? I've had 10 title defenses.
And a couple other guys like Mr. T and Sylvester Stallone and Arnold. But he really dominated in a big way and forever cemented his legacy as a pop cultural icon. And speaking of legacies, modern day philosopher Mike Tyson knows exactly how truly important that is.
I don't believe in the word legacy. I just think that's another word for ego. Legacy doesn't mean nothing. I'm just passing through. I'm gonna die and it's gonna be over. Who cares about legacy after that? Our legacy is nothing.
Okay, that's kind of a bad example. How about another icon? Jim Carrey.
I mean, you gotta admit it's completely meaningless. Here's the
Uplifting.
thing, it's not our world.
None
That's
of this
the
is
key.
real?
Nope.
So you're just passing
We don't
through?
matter. We don't matter.
Oh, wow.
There's the good news.
Okay.
Well, I guess everyone's having an existential crisis.
Oh, boy.
The 1980s were a defining decade for Chuck Norris, during which he cemented his status as one of Hollywood's most popular action stars. Known for his martial arts expertise, tough guy persona, and patriotic themes, it's no wonder Chuck Norris became a staple of 1980s action cinema. The decade began in 1980 for Chuck with The Octagon, where he played Scott James, a retired martial arts champion. Talk about real life imitating art. Basic plot for the film is, a martial artist must defeat a plan by ninjas to create a worldwide training camp for terrorists. While that may sound like pure 80s cheese on its surface, the film actually has more depth to it. For example, Chuck's character's life is plagued by flashbacks. There are the childhood memories of the rigorous training he and a friend endured under a sadistic martial arts master. There was also a mission he went on where he watched his friend get murdered. Norris later becomes drawn closer to a vicious crime ring known as the Octagon. And as he gets closer to the truth, he learns that these may be the men who murdered his friend long ago. There's nothing better than a kick-ass element of revenge in an action film. While not being one of Norris's most popular or critically acclaimed films in his career, The Octagon was a trailblazing foray into many aspects of action cinema. It has since been praised for its unique use of an internal monologue voiceover for Norris's character, which gave us an inventive insight into his thought processes. The ninja-themed martial arts, costumes, and fight choreography set the trend for the rise in popularity of this genre in the late 80s and early 90s. Up next for Chuck Norris was An Eye for an Eye in 1981. Judging by the title alone, it's safe to assume this film would also incorporate an element of revenge, which is a key theme in action cinema and a powerful motive for men. Now, of course, the pacifist Mahatma Gandhi does not condone this sort of behavior and once stated, "An eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind." But that philosophy would just make for shitty action film cinema. And as far as blindness goes, this does not apply to Chuck Norris. It's been said that Chuck Norris stared at the solar eclipse too long and the sun went blind.
A story like that's gotta be true.
In An Eye for an Eye, Norris plays Sean Kane, who is forced to resign from the San Francisco Police Department's narcotics division when he goes berserk after his partner is murdered. He decides to fight alone and follows a trail of drug traffickers into unexpected high places. The film, of course, shares some similarities with The Octagon, as Norris gets the satisfaction of avenging a friend's death by single-handedly taking out an entire criminal organization. There's a big reason why these kind of films are so popular, by the way, because they play into that male fantasy that we all have.
He is a weapon.
Often we experience or witness injustice in our own lives or in others, and we feel helpless, powerless at times. So when we watch one of our on-screen heroes basically kicking ass, taking names, doing stuff that we wish we could do in real life without repercussion, often in these movies by the end of the mission the hero doesn't face any legal repercussion, we just can't help but derive a great deal of pleasure by vicariously watching and living through our action heroes.
Right? Wrong.
Because movie justice will forever be cooler than real life justice. Up next for Chuck was 1982's Silent Rage. The tagline for this film is certainly intriguing. It reads, "Science created him, now Chuck Norris must destroy him." In the movie, Norris plays Dan Stevens, the sheriff of a small Texas town who checks out a disturbance which turns to murder. The killer is still in the house and he tries to kill Dan, but Dan stops him and arrests him. The killer attempts to flee, but is shot and killed and is taken to a medical institute. 3 doctors, led by Dr. Philip Spires, operate on the killer, and using a formula the doctors made, they bring him back to life. I know what you're thinking. Why? But why bring him back to life? It's 1981. Just go with it, man. Anyway, if bringing him back to life wasn't bad enough, the formula also made the killer indestructible. Dr. Tom Hallman tries to stop the killer, but he and his wife are killed. After the 2 remaining doctors are killed, the killer goes after Dr. Hellman's sister, Allison, and it's up to Sheriff Dan Stevens to stop him. Combining martial arts and horror with science fiction elements may seem more common now, but back in the 1980s, for a traditional action star to experiment with new characters and genres was a lot rarer and should be commended. Boy, talk about starting off the decade with a bang. You got Chuck Norris taking out a terrorist organization, taking out a drug trafficking operation, and now an indestructible killer created by science. What could be next? Well, the only man that could top that would be Chuck Norris himself. And this came in the way of Forced Vengeance, where Chuck Norris plays casino security guard Josh Randell, who is forced into violence when the Hong Kong mob threatens his friends. Of course, being a Chuck Norris movie, the mob syndicate does much more than threaten his friends. They kill the boss of the casino he works for, and Chuck must now avenge the death the only way he knows how. A bunch of karate kicks, of course. It's been said that Forced Vengeance is the most violent and vicious portrayal of Norris's filmography, and is only matched in brutality by the frequency of the fighting sequences. His continued ability to convey both strength and vulnerability is what takes the film to the next level, and his physicality and presence in the fighting scenes are what make him one of the most recognizable genuine talents in martial arts cinema. Following the gem of Forced Vengeance came Lone Wolf McQuade in 1983. The site ScreenRant.com broke down this film the best. The plot follows McQuade as he's brought into an intense case, finding out who hijacked a U.S. Army convoy and injured a state trooper's daughter. McQuade, the state trooper, and an FBI agent all join forces to track down the culprit, drugs and arms trafficker Raleigh Wilkes, played by David Carradine, and bring him to justice after further illegal activities and the murder of a federal agent. What can only be described as Norris's best action movie of the 1980s, or as just one of the best action movies of all time, Norris plays a quintessential action star who seamlessly blends martial arts with Western machismo. Though titled Lone Wolf McQuade, Norris and his co-stars all elevate each other and share incredible chemistry throughout the film. Chuck Norris and Carradine's climactic fighting sequence is a perfect culmination of the memorable martial arts, graphic action, and gritty storytelling that makes the film stand out as the best, even in a landscape filled with 1980s action classics. So in the span of 3 years, he took down a terrorist organization, took down a drug trafficking ring, took down a scientifically altered indestructible serial killer, and he took down David Carradine. But that was just the warm-up of what Chuck Norris would accomplish during the 1980s. So now we're in 1984 with Missing in Action. The movie revolves around an unauthorized rescue of POWs who were trapped in Vietnam after the war. If that sounds like the plot from Rambo First Blood Part 2, Hollywood lore has it that Missing in Action was inspired by James Cameron's treatment of the former, as well as the eventual script that he co-wrote with Sylvester Stallone. Missing in Action and its first sequel were rushed to theaters before Rambo 2 came out, but the similarities between the films were not lost on the movie fans, and even though it came out first, many people see it as a Rambo ripoff. While both films are quintessential 1980s action movies featuring Vietnam War veterans rescuing POWs, Rambo First Blood Part 2 is the more explosive, spectacle-driven film, with a deeper exploration of the psychological consequences of war. In contrast, Missing in Action is more straightforward, focusing on patriotism and justice, and it offers a slightly more grounded approach to its action. Both films had a lasting impact on the action genre and helped to define their respective stars, Chuck Norris and Sylvester Stallone, as icons of 1980s action cinema. In Missing in Action, Norris plays Colonel James Braddock, an American officer who spent 7 years in North Vietnamese POW camp, then escaped 10 years ago. Braddock accompanies a government investigation team that goes to Ho Chi Minh City to check out reports of Americans still held prisoner. Braddock gets the evidence and travels back to Thailand, where he meets Tuck, an old army buddy turned black market kingpin. Together, they launch a mission deep into the jungle to free American POWs from General Tran, played by James Hong.
Hot right! Hot right!
Vietnam is widely known as the war that America didn't win, and Missing in Action tries to rectify that by having Braddock face impossible odds to rescue at least some of the POWs who were left behind. That gives America a win it never had in reality, and Rambo 2 essentially did the same thing, a year later as mentioned.
Sir, do we get the win this time?
This time it's up to you.
That does remind me, I remember growing up on army bases back in that era when those films came out. And you'd always see those POW MIA flags, prisoner of war missing in action. And I feel like films like Rambo 2 especially, and also Missing in Action, was great for the soldiers to see. It was almost like cathartic in a way when they would watch that film.
You know there's more men out there. You know where they are. Find them.
These films are like fantasy, and to at least see in film what many of them wish they could do or have someone else do, something that would have taken place, it was nice. It resonated with American audiences, civilians alike, and that's one reason why these movies were so successful.
Mission accomplished.
Following Missing in Action would come the sequel, that is really the prequel, Missing in Action 2, The Beginning. The first two Missing in Action film movies were filmed back to back, which is how they were both able to beat Rambo First Blood Part 2 to theaters. The second film, Missing in Action 2, The Beginning, was initially meant to be the first movie, but the Cannon Group, the studio behind the franchise, realized that the second film, which became Missing in Action, was more compelling than the story of Braddock's years of captivity as a POW, which is why the release order was switched. This made a lot of sense as the studio was sure they'd have a huge hit with Missing in Action, that making Part 1, a prequel, would sell due to its sequel's success regardless of its quality. Code of Silence would follow in 1985, directed by Andrew Davis, who would later work with Steven Seagal in 1988's Above the Law. The two films share many similarities, and in both films, Chuck Norris and Steven Seagal play Chicago cops. In Code of Silence, Norris plays Eddie Cusack and is caught in the middle of a gang war while his own comrades shun him because he wants to take down an irresponsible cop. That's where the title comes into play, by the way, as Chuck Norris broke the Code of Silence. The film is one of Chuck Norris's standout movies from the 1980s, primarily because it marked a departure from his typical action hero roles. The film presents Norris in a more complex, nuanced character than many of his other portrayals as a one-man army or invincible soldier. Code of Silence blends action with crime drama, offering a grittier, more realistic take on the genre, while still showcasing Norris's martial arts expertise and tough guy persona, which just seems to ooze out of him, man, and audiences have loved it. One of the central themes of Code of Silence is the corruption within law enforcement and the struggle between justice and the system. Eddie Cusack operates in the world where both criminals and police officers are corrupt, and he has to decide whether to follow the rules of the department or to take matters in his own hands. His struggle with the system is a core part of his character, and it reflects the 1980s cultural anxieties about law enforcement, crime, and authority. Cusack's arc also revolves around personal redemption. His fractured relationships with his ex-wife and daughter, combined with his disillusionment with the police force, suggest that Cusack is looking for a sense of personal redemption, not just professional success. This internal struggle makes him a more relatable and human character compared to many of Norris's other roles. It should also be noted that there's a robotic sidekick in this film, which came out 2 years before RoboCop made its way to the theaters. That's something about the 80s, man, is the robots. Rocky IV had a robot. That Sylvester Stallone took out of the director's cut, by the way. This had a robot. RoboCop obviously had a robot. I remember growing up, I actually had a robot. It didn't really do that much, though. I think it was just like pick up a Coke can and that was it. Toys R Us used to sell those. I had like the little one. They had like those bigger robot too. Those were pretty expensive. But 80s were all about the robots, man. So of course Chuck Norris would have to have a robot in his movie. Following Code of Silence would be Invasion USA, a take on 1984's Red Dawn starring Patrick Swayze and Charlie Sheen. In Invasion USA, Chuck plays Matt Hunter, a tough, no-nonsense ex-CIA operative who takes on a brutal foreign invasion of the United States. The film is a classic example of the action genre during the height of the Cold War, combining patriotism, intense action, and a storyline about defending American soil from a violent external threat. Known for its high-octane action sequences and an almost invincible Chuck Norris at the center, Invasion USA is a quintessential one-man army film that helps solidify Norris' status as an action movie icon. Hunter is stoic, direct, and unyielding in his pursuit of justice. He's not afraid to take extreme measures when it comes to protecting American soil and neutralizing threats. He does not hesitate to kill when necessary, and his approach to dealing with terrorists is ruthless and efficient. However, there is also an underlying sense of justice and moral clarity to his character. He's not simply motivated by vengeance, but by his belief that he's defending his country from evil forces. At its core, Invasion USA is a patriotic film that highlights the importance of defending one's homeland against foreign threats. The invasion of the United States by terrorists is portrayed as a direct challenge to American freedom, values, and sovereignty. Matt Hunter is the embodiment of the American ideal, determined and unyielding fighter who stands up against those who seek to harm the nation. I guarantee you he voted for Donald Trump, by the way. Until 2007, this was MGM's second highest selling home video title behind Gone with the Wind. Delta Force would follow in 1986. The Delta Force is one of Chuck Norris's most iconic action films, where he plays Major Scott McCoy, a tough, no-nonsense member of an elite counterterrorism unit tasked with rescuing American hostages from a hijacked airplane. Directed by Menachem Golan and produced by Cannon Group, the film capitalizes on the high-octane action that was a hallmark of 1980s action cinema. It's a tale of military precision, heroism, and patriotism, with Chuck Norris at the forefront as a man who is capable of taking on impossible odds. We all expect nothing less of Chuck. The movie was inspired by the real-life hijacking of TWA Flight 847, which even with the over-the-top elements of the movie, adds an interesting aspect to it all. It's also notable as this film is the final film for actor Lee Marvin. The action sequences in the Delta Force are intense and thrilling, with a heavy emphasis on military combat and high-stakes rescue operations. While the film contains the usual 1980s action movie staples, explosions, gunfights, and hand-to-hand combat, its focus is on portraying the tactical operations of an elite military team. In this segment, we're going to start with 1986 with his animated series, Karate Commandos. At the beginning and end of every episode, the real Chuck Norris, usually at what looks like his home gym, would talk to the camera, or us, the audience, about the moral of the day's episode, whether it be telling the truth, being a good friend, or not stealing things from others. In the series, this didn't always apply to Chuck, as he stole a bike.
It's my bike. Sorry, guys. This is an emergency. I'm Chuck Norris. Contact me through the American Embassy.
A biplane, and even a space shuttle.
Americans.
Now, in Chuck's defense, he didn't just steal these because he wanted to leisurely ride the bike, fly the space shuttle, etc. He had a mission. He had to stop the bad guys at any cost possible. In Karate Commando, Chuck Norris plays himself as an action hero tasked with battling villains, protecting the innocent, and promoting the virtues of martial arts.
It's a lifetime pursuit of balance and harmony.
But with punching and kicking.
The show revolved around Chuck Norris and his team of elite operatives who fight against evil forces, led by a villain named the Claw.
Who's in charge here?
He uses his karate skills to defeat foes and save the day, often engaging in epic martial arts battles and showing off his signature moves, including his roundhouse kicks. Although Karate Commando didn't have long-lasting popularity, it capitalized on Chuck Norris's image as a tough, heroic figure. The series' appeal was bolstered by the fact that Chuck Norris was already a well-known action star in live-action films like Missing in Action and The Delta Force. Karate Commando has since become a part of pop culture, particularly among those who remember it from their childhoods or use it as part of the larger trend of celebrity-driven cartoons from the 80s. As with many of these shows, there was even a toy line. It should be noted that the studio that put out Karate Commando was Ruby Spears, which also made animated series on Rambo and Mr. T. Despite its short run, Karate Commando remains an interesting footnote in both the history of animated TV and the legacy of Chuck Norris. The 80s were something else, man. Talk about amazing animated series with a moral message from these heroic figures.
The next time things get tough, you mess up on a test or lose the game, don't let it get you down. Don't give up and you'll be a winner.
That's why the 80s was so much better. Firewalker would follow in 1986, where Chuck starred alongside Louis Gossett Jr. It was sort of Chuck's take on Indiana Jones, where he and Gossett played a pair of adventurers trying to track down an ancient Aztec hoard of gold. Chuck Norris played Roland, a tough, no-nonsense ex-Marine with a past that included fighting in the Vietnam War. He teamed up with Leo, portrayed by Louis Gossett Jr., who provides much of the comedic relief in their duo.
It's ever time for a plan. It's now next.
Roland is a more serious, action-oriented character, while Leo is often the comic foil, constantly stumbling into trouble with his more lighthearted approach.
Better be some gold up here. Get your blood. I'm coming.
The plot kicks off when Roland and Leo discover that a treasure is hidden in a remote area in Central America. However, their pursuit of the treasure is complicated by a series of dangerous adversaries, including a corrupt general and a series of armed mercenaries. The film features Chuck Norris in several intense action scenes, showcasing his martial arts expertise and rugged screen presence, but also allows him to explore some more comedic and lighter moments as he works alongside the bumbling Leo. While Firewalker wasn't a massive commercial hit, it did offer a different side of Chuck Norris than his more famous action roles, like in Missing in Action and the Delta Force. In this movie, Norris's character, though still tough and capable in a fight, is a bit more laid back, adding a layer of humor to his persona. The film's lighthearted tone, combined with Norris's signature action style, made Firewalker a unique entry in his filmography. Despite not being one of Norris's most iconic films, Firewalker remains a fun, action-packed adventure, and it showcased the versatility of Norris in balancing action and comedy in a way that wasn't typical for his usual roles at the time.
We need a new plan.
These kinds of adventurous treasure hunt movies were quite popular at the time, with Harrison Ford playing the eminent hero Indiana Jones in 1981 in The Raiders of the Lost Ark, and then following up in The Temple of Doom in 1984, and Romancing the Stone starring Michael Douglas would come out in 1984 as well. Following Firewalker, Chuck Norris would return to the Missing in Action franchise with Braddock, Missing in Action 3. This carried a similar method that Rambo took, where the sequel to the film would just be named after the hero. It should be noted that it came out the same year as Rambo 3 did, and Chuck and Cannon Films continue to try to compete against Stallone's Rambo.
What do you say, John? Fuck him.
Braddock, Missing in Action 3, continued the adventures of Colonel James Braddock, as he sought justice for the American prisoners of war left behind in Southeast Asia after the Vietnam War. This installment differed slightly from the previous films. It had a more personal tone, and a stronger emphasis on Braddock's character and motivations. Speaking of personal tone and stronger emphasis on Braddock's motivations, he discovered that he has a son from a Vietnamese woman he believed to be dead, and he is on a mission to save his previously unknown child. The film begins with Braddock, now a seasoned and battle-hardened veteran, living with the painful memory of his past and the men he couldn't save during the Vietnam War. Unlike the more direct rescue missions in the earlier films, Missing in Action 3 focused on Braddock's ongoing struggle to bring closure to the POW situation in Southeast Asia. In this case, he is called upon to rescue a group of American civilians who have been captured and are being held hostage in Cambodia. The situation becomes even more complicated when Braddock discovers that the Cambodian government is deeply involved in the trafficking of prisoners, further escalating the stakes of his mission. As Braddock delves deeper into the jungle to rescue the hostages, he faces off against a brutal network of warlords, corrupt officials, and a vast military presence determined to stop him at any cost. But of course, you're dealing with Chuck Norris, so that's a war they can't win. The tone of Missing in Action 3 is darker and more somber compared to the first two films. Braddock's personal struggle is explored in greater depth, and the stakes of the mission feel more dire as Braddock faces off against a powerful and morally corrupt system. While the film still delivers on action, it also incorporates elements of drama and character development, giving Braddock more depth than simply being a heroic one-man army. The film's pacing is more deliberate, with fewer high-intensity action sequences in comparison to its predecessors. Instead, the focus is placed on Braddock's journey through the war-torn landscape of Cambodia and his interactions with various characters, both allies and enemies. This deeper exploration of Braddock's psyche adds emotional weight to the film, making it less of a typical action flick and more of a character-driven narrative. While Missing in Action 3 was not as well received as the first Missing in Action films, it still garnered a certain level of appreciation from fans of the series. Critics and audiences at the time were divided on its tone and pacing, with some feeling that it lacked the punch of its predecessors, particularly in terms of its action sequences. However, for fans of Chuck Norris and the Missing in Action franchise, it was still a fitting continuation of Braddock's character arc, even if it was seen as a slight step down from the earlier films. As the film comes to a close, Braddock completes his mission to rescue the hostages and liberate the POWs. However, there's a bittersweet element to his victory, as it becomes clear that Braddock's personal quest for redemption will never truly be over. The closing scenes show him looking towards an uncertain future, with the weight of his past still heavy on his shoulders. The film ends with a sense of resolution for the characters involved, but leaves Braddock's inner turmoil unresolved, making it a more complex and introspective conclusion to the Missing in Action series. Overall, Missing in Action 3 stands as a more reflective and nuanced take on the action genre, but Chuck Norris delivering a performance that is less about physical feats and more about emotional resilience. For those who appreciate character-driven stories in the context of action films, it provides a satisfying and somewhat tragic end to Braddock's journey. In 1988, Hero and Terror would follow. In Hero and Terror, Chuck Norris played the role of Danny O'Brien, a tough, heroic LAPD detective who faces off against a terrifying serial killer known as the Terror. The movie, directed by William Tannen, combined elements of action and psychological horror as O'Brien confronts a deeply unsettling threat. This, of course, wouldn't be the first time Chuck faced off against a serial killer. That also occurred in 1981, which I talked about in part 1 of this series. As far as Hero and Terror goes, the plot centers around the notorious killer who had been a feared figure years ago, but was thought to be dead after a previous encounter with O'Brien. However, the killer, a hulking figure named the Terror, resurfaces, committing gruesome murders once again. The Terror's psychological manipulation and brutal tactics make him a particularly chilling antagonist, setting up an intense confrontation with O'Brien, who must battle not just his physical abilities, but also his inner demons and fears. Chuck Norris's character, as in many of his action films, is the embodiment of strength, determination, and justice. However, in Hero and Terror, there's an added depth as O'Brien deals with the trauma of his past encounter with the Terror, making him more vulnerable and relatable than some of his other action movie personas. The emotional stakes are heightened by the personal connections O'Brien has with those around him, including his partner and his love interest, which is a bit of a departure from Norris's usual lone wolf action-driven characters. The film, while not as critically acclaimed as some of Chuck Norris's other works, such as Missing in Action or The Delta Force, still delivers the action fans expect, with Norris showcasing his martial arts skills and tough guy persona in several fight sequences. The movie also delves into the theme of overcoming fear, not just of physical danger, but of confronting one's past and unresolved psychological scars. Overall, Hero and Terror blends action and suspense with a psychological horror element, making it an interesting, albeit somewhat lesser known, entry in Chuck Norris's filmography. Chuck Norris would not come out with any other films in the 1980s, leaving a small gap in his filmography in 1989, as that year would not see any releases. However, he would be back in a very big way with 1990 with a sequel to The Delta Force. So The Delta Force 2 came out in 1990, he followed that up with The Hitman in 1991, and then Sidekicks in 1992. If you want me to cover more of Chuck Norris's work in the 1990s, make sure to leave a comment below.